By the time my daughter-in-law stood in front of a judge and called me a senile old fool who couldn't manage her own money, I already had the forensic report proving she'd forged my will. Let me take you back to where this started. My name is Odalis Fontenot. I'm 68 years old, and I built a restaurant empire out of a po' boy counter in the Garden District of New Orleans. I sold it 3 years ago for just over $4 million. What happened after that sale is the reason I'm telling you this story. So if you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought your age made you an easy target, stick around. And hit subscribe before we start, because you won't want to miss how this ends. For 32 years, I built something from nothing. I started as a line cook in a magazine street diner, 17 years old, hands burned from the fryer. I ended up owning 6 restaurants under my own name, Fontenot's Table. Maybe you've heard of it. Po' boys, gumbo, a Sunday jazz brunch people drove in from Baton Rouge for I sold the whole operation 3 years ago. Not bad for a girl who grew up shelling shrimp for grocery money. Now I spend my days on my porch off Britannia Street, tending my courtyard garden, collecting old Creole cookbooks, going to second-line parades with my neighbor Delphine. A quiet life. The kind of life I earned. At least, that's what I thought. Let me tell you about my son Desmond. He's 41 now, works as a mid-level IT manager in Nashville. Decent money, nothing extravagant. He doesn't talk to me much anymore. That stopped about 7 years ago, right around the time he married Brinley. Brinley Combs, Brinley Fontenot now, is 38. Doesn't work. Never met a mirror she didn't like. She used to host at a restaurant before deciding that being Desmond's wife was a full-time career. Her actual full-time job, as far as I can tell, is spending money they don't have and looking down her nose at anyone she considers beneath her. Unfortunately, that list includes me. I remember Desmond as a boy, running to the kitchen door every time I came home from a shift, arms out. Maman, tell me everything. He wanted to work in my kitchen one day. That boy had stars in his eyes. I don't know where that boy went. The change was gradual. After the wedding, calls became rarer. Once a week became once a month. Once a month became holidays only. Christmas 2 years ago was the last time I saw them before everything fell apart. I'd made a Sunday gumbo, my specialty. Brinley picked at it like it might bite back, announced she was watching her carbs, and pushed the bowl away. Desmond said nothing, just stared at his hands. The moment that really opened my eyes came about a year ago. I called Desmond's phone. He must have pocket answered because I heard voices. Theirs. That old woman still kicking around? Brinley's voice, dripping contempt. When's she going to leave us the money and stop being such a burden? I waited for my son to defend me. Soon, probably, he said. She's not getting any younger. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for an hour, staring at the wall. 32 years building a legacy, and my own son was waiting for me to die so he could cash in. That's when I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I got a curious call from Dr. Marcus Boudreau, an old acquaintance from my Mardi Gras crew. He asked if everything was all right with my health. I told him I was fine. Why? He hesitated, then told me a woman claiming to be my daughter-in-law had been asking him very specific questions. How to have an elderly relative declared mentally incompetent. Guardianship procedures under Louisiana law. I thanked him and hung up. Then I made calls of my own. The doorbell rang at 2 in the afternoon. Through the glass, 2 figures, tall one, short one, a mountain of luggage. I opened the door. Mom, Brinley said. Yes, she calls me Mom now. Isn't that something? She pushed past me before I could speak, dragging 2 suitcases across my hardwood floors. We heard you're just rattling around this big house alone. We're moving in. Time to put all those silly misunderstandings behind us, don't you think? Desmond stood behind her with 3 more bags, looking anywhere but at my face. Brinley. Desmond. What a surprise, I said, keeping my voice pleasant. Isn't it wonderful? Brinley was already surveying my living room, eyes calculating pricing. I recognized that look. Real estate agents wear it when they're mentally appraising a house that isn't theirs yet. Family is everything, I said. The words tasted like ash. Desmond finally met my eyes. For a moment, I saw something guilt, maybe shame. Then it was gone, replaced by that blank look Brinley had trained into him. As they argued over which suitcase went where, I reached into my pocket. My phone was there. I pressed record. Brinley started redecorating before she'd even unpacked. These curtains, Mom, they're so cheap. I know a designer in Nashville who could transform this place. Transform, an interesting word. Transform my $2.3 million house into her taste, her vision, her name eventually on the deed. Desmond agreed with everything she said, nodding like a bobblehead on a dashboard. I remembered a different Desmond, 12 years old, plating a practice dish in my kitchen. Is this right, Maman? Perfect, I told him. You're a natural. That boy had opinions. Somewhere along the way, Brinley had surgically removed them. I left the property appraisal on the kitchen table, $2.3 million, right there in black and white, then watched from my study. Brinley found it in 20 minutes and photographed every page. That evening, I announced I was going for a walk. Instead, I drove to a law office on Poydras Street. Etienne Broussard specialized in elder law, protecting seniors from exploitation, mid-50s, gray at the temples, sharp eyes. Louisiana has strong protections for at-risk adults, he told me. But guardianship cases can get complicated. They'll need medical evidence you're incapable of managing your affairs. Which doesn't exist, I said. Because there's nothing wrong with me. That's your advantage. Document everything. Record conversations. Louisiana's a one-party consent state, and I think we bring in help. A private investigator, former NOPD, very discreet, Camille Toussaint. I'd remember that name. I came home to find Brinley at my desk, phone out, photographing my bank statements, my investment portfolio, the deed to my house. She didn't hear me. I cleared my throat. She spun around, and for one beautiful moment, I saw pure panic before the practiced smile replaced it. Mom, you're back early. I thought I heard a noise in here. At 11 at night. In my private study. With your phone out. Checking the time, she said, slipping the phone into her pocket. Silly me. I sat at my desk after she left and began to write. Names. Dates. Everything I'd seen. The game had begun. 4 days after their arrival, I called a family meeting. Brinley's eyes lit up like a slot machine. She and Desmond practically sprinted to the living room. What they didn't know was that I'd arranged 3 chairs by the fireplace, a folder labeled Fontenot case file on the coffee table, and 3 people waiting in my study. Etienne Broussard entered first, briefcase in hand. Then Augustin Reyes, a notary I'd engaged for the occasion. Finally, Camille Toussaint, mid-40s, watchful eyes, 20 years a detective before going private. The color drained from Brinley's face. Desmond's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Camille opened the folder. First, a photograph of Brinley outside a psychiatric office. 3 weeks ago. You asked about evaluating a family member for dementia. Then internet search records pulled from their home network. How to have someone declared incompetent in Louisiana. That's an invasion of privacy, Brinley snapped. Public sidewalk, public building, Etienne said mildly. Perfectly legal. As is a recorded conversation in one's own home, when one party consents. We were just concerned about you living alone, Desmond tried. By taking control of my finances, I kept my voice level. Interesting definition of concern. Brinley recovered fast. We haven't filed anything. You can't charge us with something we didn't attempt. She had a point, and she knew it. You're right, I said, which is why I'm giving you a choice. Leave by tomorrow morning, and I consider this closed. Stay, and I pursue every legal avenue I have. She stood, smoothed her blouse. We're not going anywhere, Mom. This is Desmond's home, too. We're family whether you like it or not. A cold smile. And if you push us, we'll tell everyone you're paranoid. Hiring investigators to spy on your own family doesn't sound like a stable woman. She didn't leave. Louisiana law on removing a house guest who isn't a tenant is slow. Etienne warned it could take months through the courts. So I made the stay less comfortable. I canceled the cable. Budget cuts, I said. I'm on a fixed income now. Brinley nearly choked. Fixed income? You sold your restaurants for $4 million. And I plan to make it last, I said, pouring coffee. Unlike some people, I know how to manage money. I stopped stocking the kitchen for anyone but myself. My oven developed a mysterious unreliability. My garbage disposal made alarming noises. Nothing dangerous. I'm not a monster. Just inconvenient for a woman used to having everything handed to her. Then I scheduled the roof repair I'd been putting off. A crew of 6 arrived at 7 each morning for 2 weeks, hammering directly above the guest room. Sorry about the noise, I told Desmond one gray-eyed morning. But you'll want the roof fixed. For when you eventually inherit it, right? He said nothing, just shuffled back to bed. Camille called with an update. She's consulted with 4 different psychiatrists over 6 months. Same story each time, an elderly relative showing cognitive decline. She's been building a paper trail. How long has this been planned? Longer than you'd think, Mrs. Fontenot. This wasn't spontaneous. Camille called back 2 days later, her voice different, careful. There's something else. I ran Brinley's full employment history, including under her maiden name, Brinley Combs. 8 years ago, before she met Desmond, she worked as a hostess at your Magazine Street location. I sat down slowly. That's not possible. I would remember. You fired her yourself. For skimming server tips. It's in the old personnel file. You wrote a check for her last week and told her never to come back. I didn't remember the face, but I remembered the incident. A young hostess, tips going missing for months, finally caught on camera. I'd fired her without a second thought and moved on with my life. She apparently had never moved on with hers. This wasn't a woman who'd stumbled into money. This was a woman circling back to finish something. 3 days later, an envelope arrived from the Orleans Parish Civil District Court. A formal petition for emergency guardianship, filed by Desmond and Brinley Fontenot, citing my cognitive decline and requesting Desmond be given full authority over my finances, medical decisions, and living situation. I read it twice, then called Etienne. They filed. Good, he said. Now they've committed. Time to stop playing defense. Going through my late husband Antoine's old ledgers for the counter-petition, I found something that stopped my heart. A personal loan made 11 years ago, $4,000, to a family named Combs, Brinley's family. Antoine had never mentioned it. The notes in his handwriting. Church friend, hard times, no interest, 11 years ago, before Desmond ever met her. Brinley had known exactly how much money the Fontenot name carried long before she ever set foot at one of my hostess stands. I sat with the ledger a long time. My husband's kindness had unknowingly planted the seed of his own family's undoing. At Etienne's insistence, I underwent a full cognitive evaluation. 4 hours of testing, doctor. Sandra Chen delivered the results with a small smile. Mrs. Fontenot, your cognitive function is in the 98th percentile for your age group. No indication of dementia. Would you testify to that in court? Gladly. Camille came to my house with a briefcase of documents. Her name was Louise Préjean, she said, spreading photographs across my desk. 74 widow, house in Metairie she'd owned for 40 years. Brinley was her real estate agent. Told her the house had foundation problems, roof damage. Recommended selling fast, below market, to a buyer who happened to be her cousin. House was worth $400,000. She tried to get Louise to take $250,000. What stopped it? Louise's daughter got suspicious, hired an inspector, found nothing wrong. The brokerage let Brinley go quietly, more worried about their reputation than about Louise. But Louise is 80 now, living in Baton Rouge, and she's willing to testify. So is a former colleague, Monique Delacroix, who heard Brinley call her an easy mark. This changes everything, Etienne said when I called him. Pattern of predatory behavior is gold in front of a jury. I told Brinley what we'd found. Her face went from red to white. You're trying to destroy me. Digging up ancient history. That ancient history has everything to do with who you are. A pattern is a pattern. There was a settlement. There were no charges. There was an elderly woman you tried to cheat out of $150,000. Sound familiar? For the first time since she'd arrived, I saw real fear in her eyes. Desmond, she screamed. My son appeared, hollow-eyed. Your mother is trying to ruin us. I'm telling the truth, I said. Something your wife has trouble recognizing. Desmond looked between us. Dad, Mom, can we talk? Just us. Something in his voice I hadn't heard in years. Backbone. Brinley stared at him, stunned, then stormed out. Did you know about Louise Préjean? I asked. No, I swear. But I knew what she was planning for you, and I went along with it anyway. In 7 years of marriage, I asked, have you ever once made a decision she didn't approve of? He had no answer. My neighbor Delphine found me on the porch. I saw your daughter-in-law today, at the coffee house on Magazine. She was with a man. Dark suit, expensive watch. Papers spread out between them. It didn't look romantic, Odalis. It looked like business. I heard something about documents and making it stick. I called Camille that night. It took 48 hours to identify him. Trent Callahan, a Nashville attorney who specialized in what he called aggressive family representation. Investigated twice by the Tennessee bar. Both times let off for lack of evidence. Then, 3 days later, Camille called with something unexpected. A young woman contacted me. Says her name is Reagan Ashcroft. She's Callahan's paralegal. Says she's been losing sleep over what she's been asked to file. She's willing to hand over internal documents, if we protect her from any fallout. Reagan's files showed Callahan had drafted a will, supposedly signed by me 3 years ago, leaving everything to Desmond. He was petitioning the court to freeze my assets pending the guardianship case. I had never signed such a document in my life. Reagan's files also showed the will template had been formatted through something called Crescent Trust Documentation Services, a paperwork filing outfit Callahan used for difficult cases. Camille traced the LLC registration in a single afternoon. It was registered to a man named Colton Combs, Brinley's brother. This wasn't one desperate woman acting alone. It was a family operation, a brother running a shell company built for exactly this kind of fraud, Doctor. Patricia Webb, a document examiner with 200 court appearances behind her, compared the signature on the fake will to 12 verified samples of mine. It's not your signature, Mrs. Fontenot, she said. The letter formation, the pressure, the baseline, all wrong. I'd stake my professional reputation on it. This is a forgery. I called Etienne. The will is fake. Forces a felony in Louisiana, he said. This just became a criminal matter. Trent Callahan strutted into the Orleans Parish courtroom like he owned it. Judge Catherine Holloway presided. Silver-haired, no nonsense. Etienne rose before Callahan finished his opening. Your Honor, I'd like to submit a forensic analysis proving the will, Mr. Callahan filed as a forgery. Color drained from Callahan's face. Brinley went very still. Your Honor, we've had no chance to review this, Callahan said. Perhaps you should have reviewed your own client's documents before filing them, Judge Holloway said, ice in her voice. Then Etienne dropped the second piece. We also have evidence the fraudulent will was filed through a shell entity, Crescent Trust Documentation Services, registered to the defendant's brother, Colton Combs. Brinley's composure finally cracked. That night, Desmond showed up at my door at 2 a.m., pale as paper. Dad, Mom, I need to tell you something. I found paperwork in Brinley's things while I was packing up her home office for the lawyers. He swallowed. Her first marriage, to a man named Wade Combs. No, Wade Hensley. There's no divorce decree. I checked with the Tennessee courts myself this afternoon. As far as the state is concerned, she's still married to him. I sat down slowly. If that was true, her marriage to my son had never been legal. Every asset claim she'd built her entire scheme around, spousal rights, marital interest in Desmond's future inheritance, was built on a foundation that didn't exist. Tell Etienne, I said. Tonight. 2 days later, Brinley's car was gone. Wallet, phone, purse, all missing. Her suitcases stayed behind. She'd run. Sheriff's deputies traced her through credit card charges east toward Tennessee to her sister's apartment in Memphis. 6 days later, Memphis police picked her up. She fought the extradition. It didn't matter. The trial opened on a crisp fall morning, live oaks dropping leaves outside the Orleans Parish Courthouse. Brinley sat at the defense table, nothing like the polished woman who'd wheeled 2 suitcases into my house months earlier. Monique Delacroix testified about the easy mark comment. Louise Prejean, 80 years old and sharp as a blade, described almost losing her home of 40 years. Camille laid out the paper trail, the psychiatrist visits, the searches, the timeline. Dr. Webb explained the forgery in careful, devastating detail. Then the prosecutor called a final, unscheduled witness, a records clerk from the Tennessee Bureau of Vital Statistics, confirming no divorce had ever been finalized between Brinley Combs and Wade Hensley. A gasp moved through the gallery. Callahan's own case, built entirely on Brinley's claim to marital standing, collapsed in front of the jury's eyes. When it was my turn, the prosecutor asked what I hoped would come of all this. I want other women my age to know we aren't easy marks, I said. Our years aren't a weakness, they're experience. If my story helps even one person recognize when they're being played, then everything I've been through will have been worth it. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. Guilty on forgery. Guilty on fraud upon the court. Guilty on attempted exploitation of an at-risk adult. Brinley's face didn't crumple. It just went cold and still, like something in her had finally accepted the game was over. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Probation, restitution, a mandatory fraud rehabilitation program, a permanent restraining order. Callahan surrendered his law license rather than face disbarment. Colton Combs is under separate investigation for the shell company. Desmond cooperated fully. No charges were filed against him. He moved back to Nashville, took a dishwashing job at a neighborhood grill, the same way I'd started 50 years earlier. He didn't call for a long time. I didn't expect him to. Then, 1 month later, an envelope arrived at the Culinary Scholarship Fund I'd just established in Antoine's name. An anonymous donation. $500. I knew exactly who it was from. Here's what I want you to take from all this. People will always underestimate what a woman my age is capable of noticing, documenting, and doing something about. I didn't get loud. I didn't get reckless. I got patient, and I got prepared. And that was enough to take apart a scheme 2 years in the making. If someone in your life has ever tried to make you feel small so they could take something from you, I want you to hear this clearly. Pay attention to the quiet moments. That's where the truth usually is. If this story reminded you of someone you know, tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories like mine, there's a link in the description waiting for you.